Hello everyone, I am Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet, and I really hope that the video actually works this time, because the last couple times I tried to film this video, my microphone was not properly connected to my iPhone, and if crazy voice control stuff starts happening on my iPhone again while I'm doing this, I'll know that I didn't properly connect it, and I'll have to do the whole video over again. Really hope that doesn't happen this time, because it has been a hassle trying to get this video right. But if you've seen the title of this video, I'm doing the Summerween horror book tag, or Summerween horror booktube tag. It's gone under a few different names. This was created by LittleGhostCreations. Great channel. I will be linking them in the description or in the cards or both. And this tag was brought to my attention because it was done by the amazing Nightmare Maven, who did not tag me, but put the tag out there and made me realize that it existed. So I will be obviously linking her channel as well. Fantastic stuff. And without further ado, I want to make sure I get this done in time and done right. So I'm just going to get into the tag. So question number 1 is, what spooky reads are you most excited about in your TBR list / pile right now? Now, the first time I filmed this video was a couple of weeks ago, actually like closer to the beginning of July. I was filming it in advance. Again, mic trouble. I'm going to be going away to college soon, so most of the books that were in my TBR pile then, or at least the books I wanted to list in this video, are packed away there. One of them that is not is Something's Missing by the amazing J. Donovan Steele, who is a friend of mine and was kind enough to send me this book. I will be reviewing this soon, so I don't want to get into too many details on it, but it was a very engaging read, and I was right to look forward to reading it. And the other books that are put away that I mentioned when I originally filmed the video are Slate House, which, from my understanding, is a classic ghost story in the same vein as Turn of the Screw, probably best recognized now as adapted into The Haunting of Bly Manor, as well as the far less successful The Turning. And Slate House was a book that was given to me by my dad a while back. He said it was a really good read, and he tends to recommend things to me that I like, so I'm looking forward to reading that. And the other book that I had listed was The Wolf Gift by Anne Rice, which has been sitting on my shelf for a while. It is her werewolf book, or I don't know if she's written others, but it's one of her werewolf books at least. And I'm kind of on a Vampire Chronicles kick right now. I'm currently reading Tale of the Body Thief, and I did also read her Mayfair Witches books and Servant of the Bones, which gave me a taste of how she looks at witchcraft and ghosts and djinn. But I have no idea how she's going to approach werewolves, so I think that will be an intriguing read. Question number 2. What's your favorite revenge novel? For me, that would, without a doubt, have to be Boring Girls by Sarah Taylor. This is a book I've already talked about numerous times on my channel. I have done a whole video kind of dedicated to my overall thoughts on this one. It is about a girl named Rachel who is kind of an outcast in high school, discovers extreme metal music as kind of a coping mechanism, and then bonds with this other girl named Fern over said music, and they form a band together, and it's this wonderful little metal coming-of-age story until something really awful happens in the middle of the book, and it becomes this downward spiral into bloody madness. Parts of it are fun. After that halfway point where everything goes to hell, it becomes less fun. I am a little depressed every time I finish reading this one. It totally wrecked me for like a week after I read it for the first time, but the fact that it made such an emotional impact on me, the fact that I was able to relate so much to the characters, and the way it talks about metal as kind of both a safe haven for outsiders as well as somewhere where there's a lot of awful misogyny that's gone on, I thought was brilliantly done. Question number 3 is, what's a horror or thriller/crime book you wish you could experience for the first time? And I was a bit uncertain on this one at first, but since thriller and crime is an option, I'm going to go with The Letters of the Devil by Ben Wright-Heuman. I don't just want to make this a promotion of the same old books I've talked about before. I did review this one a while ago. It is written by my cousin, but the reason I'd love to re-experience this one is because when I initially read it, it was kind of in chunks over extended period of time. I think if I was able to sit down and read this one from start to finish, I might have a little bit more appreciation for it, even though I have a lot of appreciation for it now. When I read the sequel, Legacy of L, I read it on a car ride in one sitting, and I was just totally immersed in that world, and I wish I could get that same thing out of this book without knowing all of the plot twists of the murder mystery already. I will never get that, but I hope other people do. Shameless promotion of my cousin's book here. It's really good. So is the sequel. Please read them. Question number 4. Sucks to suck. You were just given a handful of your least favorite candy. The one not even your siblings or friends will trade for. What candy is it, and what spooky book did you want to love that disappointed you? And my answers to both of those questions are kind of wishy-washy because I'm not someone who hates that many things with a passion, especially when it comes to spooky things and candy. I love most candy and most spooky stories, but I am not overly fond of Tootsie Rolls. They taste fine. I'm just not crazy about the chewy texture. I will still eat them though. And as for book, I do have a couple answers. One of those is Anne Rice's Taltos. This is the 3rd book in her Mayfair Witches trilogy. I did read all 3 of them, and there were a lot of things that I appreciated about them, but they are really kind of sexually perverse in a lot of weird ways. There is some borderline assaulty stuff that happens in these. There's some very incesty things that happens in these, and I was not a fan of that, but there's a reason it is in the books. But this book in particular, I felt kind of a slog to get through, and it laid a lot of that really gross stuff on especially thick in a lot of places. And the ending just didn't do anything for me. Maybe I was just numb and wanting to read something else at that point by the time I got to the ending, because I really wanted to push through this and know how it all ended. I can barely remember the ending of this one, honestly, and it didn't feel like the satisfying conclusion to this really long, epic trilogy that Anne Rice had put together. It didn't really do much for me, from what I can even remember of it. But at that point, I was just ready to put this down and start reading Good Omens, which was the next thing on my list. So I didn't hate this book. I didn't love it either. It did kind of leave me wanting, though. And the other book I was going to mention there is Salem's Lot by Stephen King, which, again, I actually like that book for many different reasons. I am a huge vampire fan, but I don't know, maybe it just didn't give me quite what I was looking for after a vampire book. If you haven't noticed, I'm a very big Anne Rice fan. I do love my bestial, sort of animalistic vampires, but I love a lot of nuance to the vampire characters in my vampire fiction, and Salem's Lot really isn't that kind of vampire book. But I don't know, there was just something about it that left me wanting, and I'm really not sure what it was. It wasn't even a bad book. I'm glad I read it, but it did not quite scratch the itch I was hoping it would. Question number 5. Time to put on your costume. If you could exist in one spooky novel, what would it be and why? And who would your best friend be? And again, kind of vamping, if you will, on the same thing I've been talking about for a while, I'm going to go with the Vampire Lestat. There is just such an expansive setting to this book with a lot of different time periods and a lot of different beautiful locations within that I would love to explore. You've got France pre-revolution and Lestat's theater troupe, which after he becomes vampire, becomes the Theatre des Vampires later on. And then fast forwarding all the way into the 80s, you've got this big spooky rock concert at the climax of the book with his band, the Vampire Lestat. And just in terms of overall atmosphere, I don't know how safe it would be, but I don't know how safe any of these spooky books would be to live in. I just love this scope and the beautiful atmosphere of the locations that are described in this book. And as for my best friend, all of the vampires are super toxic in their own ways and probably not the ideal people to be around. Lestat has his charms, but I don't know if he'd be my best friend. Marius has a lot of appeal to me, just as this kind of reclusive artist person. There's something very romantic about the life he led for a while, but he's also got his unsavory aspects as well, but so do all of them. They're vampires. So I'm gonna say maybe Marius, maybe Lestat, I don't know. Hopefully at least one of them is willing to be my friend and not kill me. Question number 6. What's your favorite haunted house book and or television show? And oddly enough, as much as I love spooky old houses, I struggled to think of a favorite haunted house book. The first one that came to mind was The Haunting of Hill House, but I didn't really want to say that just because I feel like that's a popular answer. But after Google searching, I'm not sure if I agree with this per se, but I'm gonna run with it. I saw Coraline listed on Google as a haunted house book. It is definitely a spooky house book. I don't think there are really any ghosts in it, so I wouldn't really call it a haunted house book personally, but I absolutely adore this book. I have a serious history with the book and the movie, where the movie traumatized me, and then I never wanted to watch it again, and then I read the book and rewatched the movie and fell in love with it, and it is a beautiful little story. If you live in the world, you're probably at least somewhat familiar with this one. There's a parallel world through this door that is an exact duplicate of the flat that Coraline is living in, with these creepy, uncanny valley versions of her parents and the other people who live in the flat, who all have buttons for eyes. And there are things that are wonderful about the other world, and there are things that are not so wonderful about it. And it is aimed at a younger audience, but it is legitimately creepy, and it kind of lives in that world in between kind of children's fantasy adventure a la Alice in Wonderland and just flat out horror, and I love it. And as for TV show, since that's an option, I am actually going to say The Haunting of Hill House. As much as I love the book, the way the show restructures aspects of the book and brings more depth to the characters, I thought was beautifully done, and it is one of the few pieces of media to genuinely disturb, scare, and fill me with dread. The jump scares actually worked. There was this sense of bleak foreboding throughout the whole thing that I genuinely felt, and yeah, it just made a huge emotional impact on me, and I love it for that. Question number 7 is the food question. You can only pick one from each of these would you rathers. So A is chocolate or sour candy. I'm gonna go with chocolate. I'm a chocoholic. I will eat almost anything if it is chocolate. B is coffee or tea, and this one kind of depends. I do drink a lot of sort of tea flavor things. There's a tea I drink quite a bit called Lemon Zinger. I do also like a lot of peppermint tea, but I've been told that some of those things aren't technically tea, so maybe coffee. I know I can only pick one, so I'm gonna go with coffee, but I might actually be giving the wrong answer here. And part C is apple or pumpkin pie, and it's definitely pumpkin pie. Apple pie is delicious, but I have eaten pumpkin pie more, and my sister and I make it together every year for Thanksgiving, or we have, and just have a nice history with that food, something of a nostalgia for it and an appreciation for the making of it. So all of that on top of it just actually tasting delicious makes it my favorite. Question number 8 says, show us your favorite book with a witch or woman who gets screwed over by society and the patriarchy. And I could easily recommend Boring Girls here again, but I do want to highlight another book that I've reviewed. I swear I'm not just trying to promote things that I won't shut up about already, but this is the first thing that came to mind, and that is Poor Pretty Creature by C.R.S. Lean. Again, I did review this recently. It is about a girl named Lucy who awakens one day and finds herself chained to a bed and being held captive and seemingly tested and inspected by a group called the Fathers, who are both a stand-in for the patriarchy and basically are the patriarchy. And I don't want to say too much more than that because it might spoil the book, but this definitely, while not being a witch book, has a great supernatural aspect and deals with a lot of moral ideas, talks about the nature of evil, and explores a lot of gender politics in a really engaging way. And it is written by Ciara Celine, who is another horror YouTuber that you should be subscribed to. Question number 9 asks, which book on your shelves or in your audiobook library has the scariest cover? And none of the covers of my books really scare me, but I picked this one just because for the age group that it is written for, it is a nightmarish cover, and that is the Ghost of Greylock by Dan Pawlowski. If you can see there at the bottom, this is a Scholastic book. It is a younger reader's ghost story. It's not the most frightening thing I've ever read, obviously, although it is significantly darker than one would expect for a book written for this age group. There's even a scene in the movie where the main character watches whatever happened to baby Jane with his family, and the scene with the rat is kind of burned into his brain, and oh my god, was not expecting that. But this is actually a really good read, and while it's not particularly scary in any way, the cover art looks like the cover for something in the vein of one of the Ring movies or one of the many Conjureverse films we get now, which are not at all for children. So this is the kind of cover art that I absolutely would have been intimidated by, but when passing this book in a book fair when I was in like elementary school, when I was even going to public school. But yeah, darker than expected for a book of this reading level, and actually a pretty good spooky book. And I forgot to grab the particular book for this question. I do have it, but for question 10, it says, it's Summerween and it's hot outside. What book or books do you recommend that give off summer vibes? And I'm going to recommend The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. If you haven't noticed at this point, besides Anne Rice, one of my favorite authors is Neil Gaiman. Actually, my favorite author is Neil Gaiman. And The Ocean at the End of the Lane kind of straddles between horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, and the really nightmarish element of the book kind of comes in the form of almost this kind of nightmarish supernatural alien version of an evil stepmother type character, and it kind of plays into the same fear of replacements and doppelgangers that really got to me when I originally read Coraline. But the book really starts with the main character going back to this old house where he used to live, and this lake which he always called an ocean when he was younger, and just remembering these strange things that happened to him in childhood. But it very vividly paints this picture of it being this kind of humid summer when he arrives at the house and starts reminiscing, and when we get flashbacks into his childhood. And it is a beautiful book, it is a nightmarish book, and it is really well written. Question number 11 is very long-winded, but I appreciate the creativity. You and your friends are exploring a well-known haunted house. You get separated and suddenly you hear screams coming from somewhere upstairs. You run into the next room and find two of your friends. Which two fictional characters are they? Who do you want in this situation with you? And my answers for this are weird, but I'm sticking to them. The first of these is going to be Mina from Dracula. I don't know if she has any ghosty experience. I'm pretty sure as far as this book is concerned, she doesn't. But she definitely has faced down the supernatural before, and I think she will be steeled and prepared to deal with it. As I believe Grady Hendrix said at one point, Mina's kind of the original Final Girl. I love her as a character in many adaptations, as well as this original book. She's a little bit of a victim in some ways, but ultimately she's just part of this crew that's facing down Dracula, and an absolute badass, and I would love to have her on my side while facing down other supernatural threats. And you're probably wondering, oh my god, how did he manage to fit this into this again? I thought this was a book video. But joke's on you, there's a novelization of Anna and the Apocalypse, so I'm doing this again. Yeah. But the character I'm actually picking from this is the character of John. If I was picking something from the movie, I would probably go with Steph. I absolutely adore Steph as a character. I am not the biggest fan of the way Steph is written in this novelization. She's still likable, but there are kind of a few ways in which she's written that kind of make her feel a bit more like this stereotype, and I'm not a big fan of it. John is probably not very well equipped to deal with the supernatural at all, but he is just an absolute sweet cinnamon roll in both this book and in the film, so he is just there for emotional support during the spooky haunted house goings on. Question 12. Trick or Treat, Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft, Mary Shelley, and Shirley Jackson are at your front door. Who do you give the biggest and who do you give the best and biggest candy bar to? And the way this would rank for me is absolutely the same as what Nightmare Maven said in her video for this. Mary Shelley is just an absolute legend. Without Frankenstein, I would not be where I am now, as would most of the horror genre and everything pertaining to it, so she absolutely is getting possibly multiple full-size candy bars. Then going down the list, Shirley Jackson would get the next biggest, Stephen King would get the next, and H.P. Lovecraft is getting a rock, possibly thrown at him. And finally, ending on lucky number 13, what is your favorite spooky book to movie adaptation where both of them are good? And there are a few of those, but the one that immediately sprang to mind, again, beating a dead horse here, but it's gotta be Interview with the Vampire for me. As much as I love the movie of Queen of the Damned, it is a terrible adaptation of the source material, and this is a beautiful book. It is the originator of my beloved Vampire Chronicles franchise, but also the most legitimately horrifying of any of them for me so far. There is this wonderful doom-laden, angsty atmosphere to the whole book, and all of that is translated wonderfully to film. There are a few differences, but the way the characters are presented and act and the overall scope and atmosphere of everything is strikingly faithful to the book in a way a lot of movie adaptations are not. Most of the plot is intact, and the spirit of the book, in my opinion, is completely intact. So those are my answers for this Summerween horror book tag, and I am going to tag a few people. I would not consider myself part of the booktube community, but I do know a few people that definitely enjoy a good book. So I am going to be tagging Collector Man, Charles Cochran, Are You Into Horror, Sai Chi, and CB Smith. That is my response to the Summerween horror book tag. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!